Welcome back to another edition of our First Friday webinar. And our guest for today, Fox Rothschild, with their program presentation, How Contractors Can Benefit from Innovative Procurement Methods like other transactional authorities, commercial solutions openings, and collaborative delivery methods. Joined by me is Samantha Long and Bree Beal, who are working behind the scenes, moderating a webinar today, and will also be monitoring the chat. So we have over 100 registered participants from all over the world, definitely ready to learn today's First Friday webinar. So in today's webinar, the team from Fox Rothschild will share with you the latest information on today's innovative procurement methods and how you can identify opportunities, compete effectively, as well as manage the legal and operational risks that are associated with OTAs, CSOs, and collaborative delivery methods. But first, I would like to start to welcome you all and introduce you to the First Friday webinar series, which is provided to you through SAME's commitment to offering the AEC community effective training, development, and networking programs. The DC Post is helping sustain the future of this profession with these monthly education-focused sessions that are aligned with SAME's strategic goals to drive partnerships, deliver solutions, and develop people. So again, thank you all for joining us here today as we start our program. Please feel free to use the chat, introduce yourself, share your LinkedIn profile, also where you're joining us from today. Add your email for everyone at any time throughout our program. Ask questions in the chat so we can address them during the Q&A portion at the end. You can chat with anyone and send messages to our hosts and our presenters and even to each other through the chat for today's webinar. We are recording today's session. We will post a video on our YouTube channel later on. So a copy of your slides, your PDH certificate, and an opt-in list of attendees will be available to download at the end of today's webinar. And we will also email a copy of you as soon as the webinar ends. So please be on the lookout for a document delivery subject line with your downloads as following today's webinar. We're very excited to present an hour of education virtual networking, no matter where you're calling in from. We would like to take a moment to thank our DC Post First Friday sponsors, Fox Rothschild, KCCT, Parsons, and Stantec. So we really, truly appreciate your support, and we are grateful for your generosity by making this webinar series possible for our members and our SAME community. This is our last webinar for the annual sponsorship, and now is your opportunity to support this webinar series as a new annual sponsor. So we would love to add your firm's logo to the slide for future programs and events through 2026. Annual Platinum sponsors and First Friday sponsors help support this webinar with free registration for SAME members and full-time students. So please feel free to visit our website for more information about our sponsorship levels and how you can gain visibility for your company while also giving back to the SAME community through your DC Post annual sponsorship. So now it's definitely time for the main program. Please note this program will provide one professional development hour from the DC Post. And I'm not going to read through the learning objectives, and most of you saw those while you signed up. Instead, I'm going to introduce our featured speakers in just a moment. If you haven't done so already, feel free to use the chat, introduce yourself, share any contact information, your LinkedIn profile. This is your webinar series to learn about the special topic as well as to expand your business network as well. So use the chat throughout the presentation to share comments, ask questions to the presenters. If there is a particular slide you'd like to talk about, please share those details in your chat question, and we will answer questions at the end of the program. So you will not be able to save the chat. So please make any notes that you'd like to connect with anyone before the webinar ends. So please allow me to introduce our presenters for this month's DC Post First Friday webinar. Doug Hitchman is a partner at Fox Rothschild and a seasoned government contracts attorney who advises AEC and infrastructure firms on complex federal procurement, contract risk, disputes, and compliance. Keely McCarty is a partner at Fox Rothschild and an experienced government contracts litigator who counsels contractors on bid protests, FAR compliance, investigations, and risk mitigation strategies. And Dana Molinari is an associate at Fox Rothschild who supports construction and federal contracting clients with contract analysis, risk assessments, and dispute resolutions across the project lifestyle. So please please join me in welcoming our webinar presentation team. And Doug, I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Thank you very much, Whitney. Good afternoon, everybody. Appreciate you joining in today. As Whitney said, we're going to speak for about 45 minutes about three what I consider to be relatively unique and relatively novel and almost relatively new contract delivery methods or project delivery methods. And I think these are terms that a lot of folks in the A&E industry and the construction industry have heard before. You may not have had a chance to use any of these contract or delivery methods, but we're going to get you smart on that today for, like I said, for about the next 45 minutes. And if you have questions as we go through our presentations, please feel free to drop those into the chat and one of us will answer those as quickly as we can. You're going to get over acronym today because the three delivery methods we're going to talk about or we're going to refer to as acronyms throughout the day. The first one, which I think is probably the most popular, I would say, and the one that most folks have heard of, is called Other Transaction Agreements, also called Other Transactions, also called Other Transaction Authority or Authorities. We're just going to refer to those as OTAs. And my colleague Keely is going to talk about OTAs after I give a little bit of an intro to some of the bigger picture concepts. We're also going to talk about something called Commercial Solutions Openings. We're going to refer to those as CSOs throughout the project or throughout the presentation. And my colleague Dana will talk about CSOs. And then finally, we're going to finish up with Collaborative Delivery Methods or CDMs. And I will cover those at the very end of the presentation. So these are topics I think that have become more of the rage. I don't want to say all of the rage over the last 5 or 6 years. But in particular, they become much, much more important in 2025 based on guidance that the Trump administration has been putting out and based on guidance or directives, we'll call them, that were addressed in the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2026. So the bottom line is, if you've heard of these things and you've used these things before, you're going to hear a lot more about them in the coming years and probably use them a lot more in the coming years because the Trump administration is putting a full court press on these to use these methods more and more and more based on the changes that they're making to the federal acquisition and procurement programs. So here is a big picture overview of the things that we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to tell you a little bit about our law firm and about what Keely, Dana, and I do and what we do with regard to OTAs, CSOs, and CDMs. I'm going to give a big picture overview of where these different contract delivery methods fit into with regard to traditional procurement. And then we're going to get granular on all three of these subjects. Like I said, Keely's going to get really, really granular on OTAs. Those are the ones that most people have heard of, and those are the most popular and probably going to be the ones used the most. So we're going to dig into OTAs, the pros and the cons, the good and the bad, and how you use them. We're going to then talk about CSOs, and we're going to talk about CDMs. And throughout our presentation, we're going to try to give folks an idea. And a lot of this is spitballing because there's not a ton of guidance out there specifically with regard to CSOs and CDMs. But we're going to tell you where we think the government's going to go with these. And most importantly, the purpose of the presentation is to tell folks in the A&E industry and in the construction industry what you can expect from these in those particular areas. And most importantly, how can you benefit from these different contract and project delivery methods? Because the goal of this is, one, to get you smart on this subject, but also tell you how you can use them to win work and to make money. Just a little bit about our law firm. Hopefully, I see a lot of familiar names on the list of folks that are participating. But if you haven't heard of us before, myself, Keely, and Dana, we all work at a law firm called Fox Rothschild in the Washington, D.C. office. Just a little bit of a plug about Fox Rothschild. We are a general practice firm, and what that means is that we represent clients for just about every legal issue that they may have. We do government contracts law, we do construction law, we do intellectual property, we do mergers and acquisitions, we do international, we do corporate, we do privacy, healthcare. If you have a legal need out there, we like to think that our law firm can help you handle it. We are a mid-sized law firm. We have roughly 1,000 lawyers and 30 offices across the country. As you can see, there's a map of where we're located. That sounds like a big-sized law firm nowadays, but it's actually a mid-sized law firm. We were based in Philadelphia. Our Philadelphia office was founded roughly 120 years ago. We've been in business for a long, long time. And I advertise our DC office as a blue-collar law firm based out of Philadelphia. So we're a mid-tier market law firm. We think our rates are very, very competitive for what we do in DC. There's about 25 of us in our DC office that focus exclusively on federal government contracting issues and federal construction issues. And we also do a fair amount of commercial work as well on the A&E side and the contracting side. And we are also proud members of the SAME DC Post. We also do things with the Nova Post, the Blue Ridge Post, and we do things with other posts when we can. But we've been members and proud sponsors of the DC Post probably for about 5 or 6 years now. So I'm going to give you a big picture overview of the federal procurement system. And I know that the vast majority of you, if not all of you, are government contractors. So some of this is going to be old hat for you. But in general, if you look at this, we'll call it a fan or a pie chart. And this is something that I got from Defense Acquisition University. And if you're ever interested in finding out good guidance on certain procurement issues, DAU or Defense Acquisition University is a good place to look. They've got a lot of information that's very, very helpful on novel issues and unique issues like OTAs, CSOs, and CDMs. But in any event, if you look at, and hopefully you can see my cursor moving up and down, but if you look at this blue pie chart, this is what we're all used to. This is what we've worked on as lawyers, as contractors, as architects, as engineers. If you've been doing government contracts even for a couple years, this is what you're familiar with for the most part. This is how the government has historically procured goods and services since it's been procuring stuff and since the FAR has been in effect. And over here, you see certain things. You see FAR Part 12, which is procurement of commercial items. You see FAR Part 13, simplified acquisition. You see FAR Part 15, which all of us should be familiar with because that's generally how the government procures A&E services and construction services. You see IDIQs in FAR Part 16. This is what we know. This is what we're used to. This is how the government, this is their de facto way of procuring work, goods, and services. And it's all based on the FAR. And think of this blue pie chart as essentially an old pickup truck. It's reliable. It gets the job done. It may not be the prettiest. It may break down every once in a while, but it gets the job done. Contractors know how it works. Government knows how it works. And for the most part, it works pretty well. There's pros and cons with the blue pie, just like everything else. But this is what the government's been using historically. Now, in the last 5 or 6 years, but especially in the last year, the government, under the Trump administration, has put on, like I said, a full court press to use what we'll consider to be non-traditional contract methods and non-traditional project delivery methods. And over here, you can see things that are not based on the FAR. You see things like other transaction authority over here. And you're going to see CSOs essentially on the line here. And Dana's going to talk about this. But CSOs are as close to non-traditional procurement methods as you can get without being an OTA. And you're going to see CDMs running the gamut in here on this green pie as well. Now think of this green pie not as an old pickup truck, but as like a fast, sleek sports car. It's all the rage right now. It looks really, really cool. Allegedly, with regard to these delivery methods, it's faster, more efficient. Everybody saves money doing it. It looks really, really cool. And it makes the government operate more like it's Silicon Valley-like. And that's what ultimately the government wants. They want to get away from this archaic way of procuring goods and services and get into something that's sleeker, faster, and it's going to save everybody money. It's more innovative. It's more reactive to things. And you don't have to wait a year for a solicitation to come out. You don't have to compete for it for a year, then wait a year for the government to make a decision on the awards. It can happen in a matter of months, or at least that's what the government's selling us. All right, so this is the realm we're going to talk about here in this green pie today. And like I said, the first things we're going to talk about are other transaction authority. Just to put it in perspective for you with regard to OTAs, which is primarily the thrust of our conversation today. But looking at the numbers as to how often OTAs are used. Back in 2004, the government issued $2 million worth of OTA work throughout the entire government. Okay. In 2024, the government has issued $20 billion in OTAs. And that was before the changes with the Trump administration, really pushing OTAs to be a preferred procurement method that the government uses government-wide. So we went from $2 million in 2004 to $20 billion in 2024. And who knows where we're going from here, but it's not unreasonable to think that $20 billion in 2024 is going to double in 2026 and double again in 2028. So these things, OTAs, CSOs, CDMs, they've been around for a while, but they're going to be around a lot longer. And it's going to behoove you as a contractor to understand how these things work, how they operate. And like I said at the beginning, most importantly, how you can use them and how you can use them to make money. So I'm going to turn the OTA part over to my colleague Keely, and she's going to jump into it and get really granular with it. If you have any questions, like I said, as Keely moves forward with her presentation, or Dana does, please drop those in the chat, and I'm happy to answer those. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here. Thanks for having us. So I'm going to talk a little bit about OTAs, and it is an interesting topic. You know, Doug mentioned that it's the new shiny sports car, and that is true to a certain extent, though OTAs have been around for a long time. So OTAs actually started out back in 1958. They were a product, a vehicle that was given to NASA to advance the space race. And the whole idea behind them was that, you know, it was meant to cut through the red tape of traditional procurement contracts and allow NASA, who was dealing with, you know, cutting edge technology products and services, to move forward quickly and really get the best product and the best intelligence for the government. And that is still the way that they are used today, though, you know, much broader. So the intent is to allow the government to procure or develop new technologies quickly, agilely, flexibly, but their use has broadened quite a bit to all different kinds of research prototypes and follow-on production contracts. OTAs are really defined more by what they are not. That's the way the statute is written. They are defined as other than contracts, other than grants, cooperative agreements. So they are not a procurement contract, they are not a grant, and they are not a cooperative agreement. And the reason why that is important is because those terms of art, a procurement contract, carries with it a whole set of laws that apply. And so the typical laws that we know as applying to procurement contracts, things like the Federal Acquisition Regulation, but a whole host of other laws, do not apply to other transaction agreements. And that's why they are more flexible and able to move quicker, because they don't have some of the red tape that's attached to these other vehicles that the government uses for goods and services. So it started out with NASA, but soon DoD, DARPA received the authority to use this type of vehicle. And now Department of Energy, HHS, DHS, DOT, and several sub-agencies within those agencies have this authority to use for various projects. It's important, depending on which agency you're working with, to know that the authority is not necessarily the same across agencies. Most of these agencies derive their authority from the DoD statute, and so they're similar in terms of what they're allowed to do with OTAs. But there is some unique authorities, like NASA's authority actually looks a little bit different than what DoD can do. So you have to, you know, look at the specific agency involved to make sure you understand the framework of when the agency can use the OTAs and how. So I mentioned that some laws do not apply to OTAs. That includes the FAR. It also includes the Contract Disputes Act. That does not apply to OTAs. The Competition and Contracting Act does not apply to OTAs. Cost Accounting Standards, Truth in Negotiations Act. These things are all laws that we're familiar dealing with, in negotiations for procurements, and they do not apply in the OTA context. But some laws still do apply. The False Claims Act, for example, still applies to OTAs. So you still have that risk, that enforcement risk. If you are receiving even $1 in federal funding, whether it's through a procurement contract or an OTA, you are responsible for making truthful representations to the government in connection with that funding. And, failure to do so, you can have the same sort of liability on the back end. The Procurement Integrity Act also applies to OTAs, meaning, the government is limited from sharing certain information about you and about the contract with others outside the government. FOIA still applies, the Anti-Deficiency Act, and your basic Civil Rights Act requirements for, equal treatment of your employees still applies under OTAs. So some things are the same, but some things are very different. And the use of OTAs really has grown so much in the last 10 years, really. 2016 was when it took off. And in 2024, I think I saw it was about $18 billion was allocated to OTAs across the government. So it's really, there's a big push right now. And Doug, can I control the slides? I'm going to try. Oh yeah, good. I got it. Okay. So what is the authority? The primary authority used today for OTAs is found in 2 DoD statutes. Section 4021, which used to be 2371. Sometimes you might see that reference. That's a historical statute that was updated to 4021, authorizes research and development OTAs. And 4022 is usually the section that we're dealing with, which allows prototype OTAs and follow-on production OTAs. So 4022 broadly allows prototype projects that are relevant to, quote, enhancing the mission effectiveness of personnel of the Department of Defense, or improving platforms, systems, components, or materials proposed to be acquired or developed by DoD, or existing systems or components. That's pretty broad. And even within the statute, there is no definition of prototype. So what we see is that agencies can define a lot of things as a prototype. I've seen even designs be called a prototype in terms of awarding a design OTA to develop a design for some, piece of a system or a piece of a building on an Air Force base. That can be a prototype if the agreements officer can find a way to make it fit that definition. So there is some flexibility there in defining what a prototype is. And there's something new in the authority and the DoD's other transaction authority, which is in the 2023, this should read the NDAA 2023, not 2026, but it clarified that prototype OTAs can be used for DoD facility and installation prototypes. So historically, we've seen that OTAs have been used for some construction projects and some military construction type projects, but it wasn't always clear that that authority was there. It's a little bit of a, interpretation of the prototype definition. But in 2023, the NDAA clarified that DoD could use this authority to acquire facility and installation prototypes and repair. So the way that they describe this authority is for prototype projects that are directly relevant to enhancing the ability of DoD to prototype the design, development, or demonstration of new construction techniques or technologies to improve military installations or facilities. So this is pretty broad, and we've seen it used a few times, but for various things. It could be, a building in a place on a base that does sort of cutting edge research or projects, but it's really up to the government agreements officer to decide whether the OTA is appropriate to use for the project that it has. The other big thing that DoD has in Section 4022 is that DoD is allowed to award follow-on production contracts based on a successful prototype OTA. The production contracts can be either another OTA, or they could be a traditional FAR-based procurement contract. And that's a big deal because the government can then award that follow-on production FAR-based contract as a sole source contract without competition, as long as the prototype OTA was awarded based on some competition. Then the agency can award a follow-on production contract to that same awardee, that same contractor, without any competition. And it could be a massive production contract. There's really no, very few bounds around that. So that's a potentially great opportunity for companies that can get in on the prototype level to then have further opportunities after that. Let's see. Okay. And I think Doug already covered on this slide some of the push from the administration and in recent years to continue increasing the use of these OTAs, both in military construction contexts and every context. So solicitation and award for OTAs. How can you find these opportunities? There are a variety of ways, but it's not always straightforward. So sometimes you can find OTA opportunities on sam.gov, but not always. They're not all posted there. Sometimes agencies will maintain their own database of projects. And so if there's an agency that you work with or that you have a particular expertise that benefits, you might check their agency website. Industry days, we've had clients that have a lot of luck at industry days, networking with government personnel, agencies, learning what it is that they need for the projects that are on their desk at the moment, and finding opportunities that way. Consortium websites, which we'll talk a little bit more about consortiums in a minute, but there are a variety of ways. And if you're only checking sam.gov, you're going to miss a lot of these OTA opportunities. So it's important to spread a wide net. OTAs, really more than procurement contracts, have a strong kind of networking piece to them because these OTAs are meant to further the needs of the government that are cutting edge and are really on their minds day to day. We see a lot of conversations at industry days or just, at conferences or things like that, that then result in an OTA opportunity for our clients because someone at the government learned that our client can actually provide this service that they need or this product that they need. So networking, I think, is a big key to opening up more opportunities to OTAs. In a way that I don't think procurement contracts, everyone can kind of go on sam.gov and know what's out there. It's not the same for OTAs. And you can have, so OTAs can be done either through direct procurements, not procurements, but direct solicitations from the government where you can submit either a proposal or a white paper, or they can be done through a consortium. And we see this a lot with OTAs. Basically, the government awards a contract or an OTA to a consortium, which is like an umbrella entity, and the consortium runs the OTA process. So the consortium will then award all of the smaller OTAs, the subawards, to the companies that are actually performing the work that the government needs. The consortium acts almost as a contract administrator in this function and tries to find solutions to the government's need itself. But what that means is that often the consortium have their own websites that host these opportunities for OTAs. And so it's helpful to know the various consortia that are working in the area that you might be interested in and to check their databases for opportunities as well. Some of the current opportunities that are going on. I know the Navy has a massive submarine industrial base effort. They're trying to rebuild their submarine industrial base through a big OTA that's being managed by Blue Forge Alliance. Similarly, the Air Force Research Laboratory has a $100 million OTA being managed by a System of Systems consortium for battlefield management systems. And so sometimes now what DoD is doing is when they have one of these big projects that are just have many, many pieces, they first award it to a consortium and let the consortium figure out what the best place to put the money is. That can be good and bad. Obviously, then the consortium is kind of making the calls, but it's a good idea to seek out those consortia, build relationships with them as well, not just the government customer. The other thing here to note is that negotiations for OTAs are huge. So once you do find an opportunity and you submit your white paper or you submit your proposal, and it can look a million different ways because the law doesn't actually mandate how the agencies should solicit and award these contracts. They have a lot of flexibility. So, but once you find an opportunity and you propose, and you get an award, negotiation is huge. Because these are not governed by the FAR, there are no standard terms for an OTA. You can see the whole run of the mill, anything you can imagine, sometimes even including FAR clauses. Depending on the agreements officer that you have, they may try to resort to FAR clauses because that's what they know and that's what is available and it covers a lot of bases, but they don't have to, and you also don't have to accept those FAR clauses in an OTA. There's a lot of things that aren't automatically covered, like intellectual property rights. That's one of the big reasons for OTA use in the first place, is to provide more flexible intellectual property rights to companies that are creating cutting edge technology, who may not want to hand over the rights to the government as you might have to under a traditional procurement contract. So it's important that you can negotiate those IP rights under an OTA. Same thing with flow down requirements to your subcontractors. You can negotiate those. Changes and modifications, there's no changes clause, right? There's no automatic way of handling changes. So you have to make sure that that's negotiated in the contract the way that you want it to be. Termination, same thing. And then dispute resolution is so interesting. It's not these are not covered by the Contract Disputes Act. So there's no dispute resolution procedure prescribed by statute. So you have to put it in the contract the way you want to handle it. Okay, let's see. So the pros are, these are more flexible. OTAs are more flexible than traditional procurement contracts. You have fewer rules. The agencies can procure things quickly. Maybe it helps you deliver solutions more quickly. It can create opportunities for non-traditional government contractors who otherwise might not be willing to do business with the government because of the compliance risk. There can be interesting teaming arrangements used by the agencies. You can do all kinds of different things that may not be available under traditional contracting. But it really highlights that you have to make sure you know what's in your agreement. You have to pay close attention. You probably want to involve counsel early to make sure you're getting the best terms possible, because you can get better terms. You can get terms that you want. You're not stuck with the same old FAR clauses that you've been working with forever and ever. And once you have a successful prototype OTA, you can potentially get follow-on awards from other agencies and from that agency. There are some cons or some risks that you should be aware of when you're thinking about an OTA. So because OTAs are somewhat cutting edge, case law is really limited around OTA disputes and claims. I think there is one Court of Federal Claims case out there about a dispute related to an OTA. Court of Federal Claims probably has jurisdiction to hear disputes over OTAs if something goes wrong on the project, but it's not really been tested. One case, one decision. So there's some risk there of how things will go in the courts. Same thing with bid protests. If you spend a lot of time working up a proposal or a white paper for one of these projects and something goes wrong, protesting an OTA award is actually quite difficult. There's very limited jurisdiction out there for the courts and GAO to hear a protest. GAO can hear pre-award protests where the protester is alleging that the agency should not have used an OTA at all. They should have used a procurement vehicle or some other contract type, but that's it. Court of Federal Claims is really the only venue where you can bring bid protests related to OTAs, and even they have drawn a pretty narrow jurisdictional line of what they will hear. So that's something to keep in mind. The legal aspects are a little bit grayer, and there's some risk there. So the FAR doesn't apply. There's some uncertainty. OTAs really require flexible and knowledgeable agreements officers to take full advantage of them and to be able to administer these contracts that are not cookie cutter. And they take some work to find. But in all, I think, OTAs can be a great opportunity, but you do need to kind of keep your eyes open as you go. And I think that's all I have to say here. I'll hand it back to Doug or Dana.
Thanks, Keely. Dana's going to jump in on CSOs, but just real quick to reiterate what Keely said, the sea change in OTAs with regard to construction and A&E projects is that the government has said now that OTAs can be used for facility contracts. When you look up the definition of a facility contract, that is any work on a DoD piece of real estate, which means any repair and any construction, new construction or any renovation. So OTAs can be used going forward and will be used for all kinds of DoD construction contracts. And again, like we said, the Trump administration is pushing OTAs like more than any other kind of contract vehicle out there. So these are here to stay for a long, long time. And they're going to be used a lot more for construction. As Keely said, you don't have to follow the FAR if you're the government. You don't have to have specific solicitation requirements. You don't have to have specific evaluation requirements. You can do sole source awards if the government wants to. And it's going to be based on a commercial contract. So they're very, very flexible, but it takes a lot of corporate knowledge on the government side and the contractor side to make them work. Okay, go ahead, Dana, please, if you would, on CSOs.
All right, commercial solutions openings, what we're referring to as CSOs. What are they? It really is just a call to industry. It's a contract vehicle that enables the government to pitch an issue or a solution that they want and have industry respond with their ideas on how they can make it possible. Right now, as of the 2026 NDAA, CSOs can be used to procure commercial products, commercial services, or non-developmental items, what we refer to as areas of interest in the CSO solicitations. This is actually a big change because previously it had to be an innovative commercial item or service, meaning it had to be something that was new as of the time the CSO solicitation was issued. They removed that whole innovation requirement, so now they can be used to procure a wide variety of commercial services and products. The CSO itself is, like I said, a pitch to industry, and they ask for a solution, they require submissions, and then they can make an award based either on an OTA, as what Keely said, you have that special negotiated contract with the government, or they can issue a FAR-based award as a commercial item or service under FAR Part 12. That's why it's kind of straddling the traditional and the new. It really is just a vehicle for the government to engage the public and industry during the procurement phase. The type of contract that's awarded is ultimately kind of left to the end of it. So what happens is any kind of contract that's awarded, it has to be fixed price. It could be fixed price standard or fixed price plus incentive, but there's no cost reimbursable contracts that can be awarded using this method. There still are competitive processes just like with OTAs, but it's different. It doesn't have to have the same rigid procurement requirements and evaluation procedures. Under this vehicle, you can award up to $100 million contracts. After that, you do need to get permission, special permission to use a CSO to make that kind of award. But there's a wide variety of things they can order under this. The authority here comes from Section 803 of the NDAA for FY22. There was a pilot program issued in 2017 to kick this off, and it was so successful that they made it permanent in the 2022 NDAA. There's also the DFAR section 21270, and then 10 USC 3458. So how do they work? As I mentioned, they put out a posting on sam.gov where they say, here is our problem. We need a new solution to modify X. And they have very vague parameters. There's no scope or statement of work. They pretty much just ask industry, how would you solve this problem? And companies respond through responses and submissions, much like OTAs. It can be white papers, briefs, videos, pitches generally. It is very flexible. It's not like typical proposals. As a typical proposal goes under the FAR, there's a strict statement of work, and bidders need to prove how they can best perform that work at the best price. This is different. The agency is asking industry to tell them, how should we develop this scope of work or the statement of work, pitch it to us, and if they ultimately like it, then there's a formal proposal submission phase. So it's an iterative process. It's being pitched as a very fast and efficient way to procure and a cost-saving way to procure, but it might be, we'll see how this shakes out, it might be more cost efficient for the government because it's essentially asking industry, hey, can you help us figure out how we should fix our problem? And if they like your solution, you might be the one that gets to perform the statement of work that industry helps build through this process. Much like OTAs, you can protest the award. And as I said, there's phases, so there needs to be an actual award. You can protest it at GAO or Court of Federal Claims. And as of now, the GSA has started its own pilot program that tracks very closely with the DoD one to have their own CSO process. So we're seeing other agencies outside of defense adopting this and making their own formal guidelines. This is just a timeline here. So CSOs get posted, the area of interest is discussed. And now this government review process in the middle, as I was mentioning, this chart makes it look like it's a one-stop shop and then an award is made. In many cases, it's a 3 or 4 phase approach where government can go back and forth with offerers and select and narrow the field. They generally retain a great discretion to select as many or as few awardees as they want and pretty much retain the right to cancel their CSO or their need at any time. So it is an iterative process, and there's some risks that come with that. The pros, more flexibility, especially for the government. And if it goes well, this can be a very fast award. If they get a solution they like, they can issue a contract award quickly. It's great because you do not need the standard past performance as you would with a regular procurement. So many new businesses can get into this. And if you have an innovative solution the government wants, it can get your foot in the door without any real experience in government contracting. The cons, like I said, it can be so back and forth that this can go on for years. It can be open for years and there can be modifications and revisions, and that's costly. Some of these CSO solicitations even say explicitly, if you make it through second and third phases, that there's no guarantee that you will be paid for the time that you're pitching and developing these needs for the government. So there is a potential investment that goes into this that may not be rewarded. And how you can benefit, it's much the same way you can with OTAs. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to CDMs.
Okay, this is the last part of our presentation, and I promise to go through this in about 2 minutes because we're a little bit short on time. But this is actually a concept or a thought process that I believe most of you on the presentation have heard of or discussed before, maybe even participated in a project that dealt with CDMs or collaborative delivery methods for construction projects. In general, a CDM is a thought process. It's a nebulous cloud of structuring a contract and a project delivery method to ensure more collaboration up front during the critical part of the pre-con phase, for the most part, in the design phase of a project to ensure that the collaboration is at an all-time high when it's needed the most. And the theory is with CDMs is if you get people involved earlier in the project, and by that I mean the construction manager and the contractor involved in the design phase and the pre-con phase, it's going to be more efficient for the owner and all the stakeholders, and it's going to be cheaper for everybody, and everybody can save money, and it works out great. That's true for the most part. In theory, if it works out well, it saves everybody money, the schedule's better, the schedule's more efficient, you have less changes, less design issues, and less disputes. That's not always the case, but that's the goal with that. And everybody understands how design bid build works. Everybody understands how design build works, or a CM or a CM at risk. Those are older, archaic ways of designing and building in the federal sphere that the federal government still uses. On the commercial side is more collaborative, and they do some of these methods that the federal government has been using more and will continue to use more of throughout the course of the next couple of years. This is a chart that kind of shows you, and if you can look at this particular gray area of the box, here you have design build right here. Here you have design bid build. And as you can see, you have stovepiped areas of design happens first, and then you go out and procure, and then you construct. And there's friction and inefficiencies throughout all three of these processes. But if you use something like progressive design build, you're not going to have that as much as you will in these older archaic methods of building. And during this critical performance period, usually at the beginning of the project, during pre-con or during design, you're going to have all of these stakeholders involved in the process, which again creates communication, eliminates disputes, eliminates confusion, and saves money for everybody. Let's see here. The pros of CDMs are that, again, like I said, it maximizes efficiency, schedule, saves money for everybody, increases team efficiency, quality management's improved, safety's improved, compliance is improved, and theoretically the owner is happy. What are the cons? Well, the administrative costs are usually going to go up because when you get a contractor or CM involved earlier on in the project, you're going to pay those parties more, but theoretically you're going to save money in the long run. What are some of the other cons? Well, it requires a very, very engaged owner on the federal side, especially. If they're going to use CDM as opposed to design build, they're going to have to think more. They're going to have knowledge of how to handle these contracts and these projects. And there's no statutory authority for these yet. It's a good idea in theory, and the government has used some of these projects in the past, but they need to get some authority in place to do them more. You can benefit from them, push your contracting officers, your agencies to think CDM more and more on future projects, especially big infrastructure projects. And that is all we have on OTAs, CSOs, and CDMs. Now's the time, and I'll turn it back over to Whitney because I think we'll have some time for Q&A.
Yes, no. Hey, Doug, Keely, and Dana, that was great. Really, really appreciate that. And if you have any questions that haven't been answered, I know Doug has been very active in the chat, responding to quite a few questions. So please, if you still have any additional questions, please feel free to add them into the chat. So we're going to go over a few of them, and then we'll kind of make sure we touch base on some of those questions that Doug did answer. So please feel free to ask any additional questions as well. But again, thank you for this, especially being such a hot topic. So what has been the growth of the use of OTAs kind of over the past 8 years? I know you talked about it 20 plus years ago. But really, it does kind of be consolidated to the past 8 years. What's really
sure?
So,
go ahead, Keely. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say, so in around 2016, I know the numbers that I've seen around 2016, I think the government was awarding around $1 billion a year in OTAs, and now we're up to, what did I say earlier, like 180 billion, and exponential, particularly in the last 5 years. It keeps growing, and I haven't seen the numbers yet for 2025, but I think it was on the same track to be higher than 2024. So yeah, and I also just
what do you see like moving forward as well?
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me that this is going to continue. I think this administration, at least for the next 3 years, they've really placed an emphasis on doing things in a non-conventional way, an unconventional way in terms of contracting and removing barriers to entry. We're seeing that with the revolutionary FAR overhaul, where they've moved, the regulations, many of the former regulations into guidance instead of being mandatory requirements. So even within the FAR that used to be much more restrictive, that's been loosened. So I expect that more money will be moved to OTAs where agencies have even more flexibility going forward.
Got it. Okay. So I appreciate the breakdown on that. So here's another question. So may an agency award a sole source follow-on production contract governed by the FAR under the OTA.
Yeah, and so that's one of the interesting things about the OTA authority, at least DoD's OTA authority, is that they can kind of skip over the competition for a FAR-based procurement contract by developing a prototype under an OTA first. If that prototype is successful, then the statute gives DoD the authority to award a sole source procurement contract, traditional FAR-based procurement contract, to the contractor that did the prototype. So that's kind of a huge authority that really, has been the subject of some protest in court because people want to compete obviously for this work. But if you are lucky enough to get in on the prototype level, then you're the lucky one, so to speak. I also wanted to address, I saw a question from Dennis Ellington in the comments. I don't know if Doug, I don't think Doug answered this one, but Dennis had asked, when the government is procuring architectural and engineering services under an OTA, how do they comply with the Brooks Act? And I think that the Brooks Act only applies to procurement contracts. So this is where things get really tricky. If you actually read the Brooks Act, it applies to procurement of architecture and engineering services, and OTAs are not procurements. It's semantics, right? Like they're obviously obtaining goods and services through a agreement, but it is not a contract and it is not a procurement contract. And so that they are carved out from things like the Brooks Act.
Got it. Okay. Here's a question from Mohan is, can you cite a few projects that have successfully delivered construction using OTA? That can be, general construction, construction services, but any projects you can reference?
Yeah, so it's interesting because this is such a novel thing. I think, in the literature that I've read, I don't have any firsthand that have been completed in my experience, firsthand completed construction projects. But I know historically, DOE has used OTAs in design, construction, and operation of biorefinery plants. I know in 2008, they were pretty early. They awarded a massive OTA for that. And then also TSA has used OTAs to fund like demolition costs and electrical and infrastructure communication costs and design and construction management costs at airports to support baggage screening systems as they're constructing those systems within the airports. So a little bit different than general construction, but that's a few examples that I've seen.
Those projects are very few and far between right now. The track record for OTAs in construction, but again, like we said, they're coming. They're going to be coming based on the momentum behind OTAs.
Got you. And so we got time for one more, but the team's able to stay after 1 o'clock. But so does the FAR 36.209 prohibit the government from awarding a FAR-based follow-on production contract for construction to the same firm that provided the design under the original prototype OTA?
Yeah, so this is a super interesting question. I think everyone or most people in the room probably know that FAR Part 36 has this prohibition where agencies cannot award a construction contract to the same firm that provided the design under a separate contract. It's different than progressive design build or something, but it's you have this sort of like OCI, this conflict of interest prohibition. And so there's this question of if an agency procures a design for a building through a prototype OTA, can they then award a FAR-based contract or another OTA for the construction of that design to the same company? And I think, it's never been litigated, so we don't know for sure what a court would say. But I think if it's OTA to OTA, if there's a prototype OTA and a construction OTA and they go to the same firm, I don't think there's any problem with that because the prohibition is in the FAR and the FAR doesn't apply. arguably, if the follow-on construction contract is a FAR-based traditional contract, then that might come into play, and you might have a problem with the construction piece being done by the same firm. But yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So we need to wrap up a couple of things on the SAME on the DC Post side, but I know the team's going to stay around for a few minutes. We'll go through some of the answered questions as well briefly. So if you want to stick around and talk with them, they're more than welcome. But I do need to wrap up a few things first. So again, thank you to everyone on the team for coming. So Doug, Keely, and Dana, really appreciate your insights again, and the feedback across everyone who was part of it today. So, but before we wrap up, I do want to share some of the upcoming events that we do have planned. So please mark your calendar for our local Post events and some of the national events as well. So join us next month for our February 1st Friday webinar on Friday, February 6th, as Tracy Marcinowski shares Acquisition 2026, a revolutionary FAR overhaul, commercialization, and consolidation. Tracy is a former GSA Public Building Service Assistant Commissioner of Acquisitions. She will break down how the FAR overhaul and related reform extend beyond IT, that is reshaping design, construction, and infrastructure programs. This session will help AEC professionals understand what is changing, why it matters, and how to engage with agencies as expectations evolve. And registration is now open for the February webinar, and it's open today. Are you interested in sharing your knowledge on current educational topics on the First Friday webinar series with our members? We are accepting presentation abstracts for spring 2026. Visit our website to learn more and submit your topic today. And sponsorships are also available to help support this popular program. We have a couple of upcoming SAME national events. The 2026 Career Transition Workshop is returning in both a virtual component this month and live sessions next month. If you're transitioning from the military to private industry, or you're simply looking to change jobs, this program will help you with your resume, understand career options, and help you network throughout the SAME community. And registration for that is now open. Save the date for the SAME members only event for Capital Week, which is right in our backyard up in Rockville. Learn about upcoming programs for all the government agencies and help align your business development to support our government's mission. SAME JETC is returning to Portland, Oregon. And this event brings together programs and training you won't get anywhere else. Learn more about the conference at samejetc.org. And we have a very busy schedule here for the DC Post. Our DC Post STEM Scholarship online applications is now open. This program is designed to recognize and reward outstanding STEM students who have demonstrated academic excellence, leadership potential, and commitment to make a positive impact in our communities. This is open to incoming freshmen, undergraduates, trade school, and graduate students in STEM programs that is related to the SAME mission and vision. Last year, the DC Post awarded more than $75,000 in STEM scholarships. Please share this opportunity with any STEM student you know, and the deadline is Monday, March 30th. And last year, the DC and Nova Post supported the Wreaths Across America program at Arlington, and please join us for the National Wreath Out Day to support the cleanup event. Gates open at 8 a.m. The National Women's Memorial will be sharing hot chocolate for all the volunteers. This is a thank you for supporting the event and local national veterans cemeteries around. The DC Post 30th Annual Awards and Military Branch Awards Program is coming up on the January 28th at the National Press Club. Celebrate an evening of professional achievements with all 6 branches of our uniformed military and recognize SAME leaders in our industry. We celebrate excellence, we honor service, and we connect as a community. Sponsorship is available, and don't miss out on our first in-person event of 2026. We have our upcoming Transatlantic Energy Security Symposium on Wednesday, February 4th at the National Press Club. So we join architecture, engineering, and construction community on this one-day event focused on energy securities for facilities and installations. You hear from policy updates and insight directly from experts in the legislative and executive branch. So don't miss out on this great opportunity to stay ahead of emerging priorities that are shaping our overall industry. Registration is open at sameenergysecurity.org. SAME and NAESCO members actually save $50 on registration now through January 28th. And you can join us on March 3rd as we return to salute to the military game night at the Capitals, take on the Utah Mammoth for a fun evening at the Capital One Arena. The DC Post has reserved a group of tickets for all of our members and guests. Each ticket will give you a special night-end game night celebration supporting the military and their families, and a game hat. $12 of each ticket will also be donated to Team River Runner. There's only a limit of 30 tickets, so make sure you register today. And we have a save the date for the APA Federal Planning Workshop, which is returning on June 16th to 18th at the National Press Club. It is a 3-day partnership, which is partnering with APA Federal Planning Division. So we're bringing together planners, architects, engineers, facility professionals to talk about policy updates, planning strategies, and collaboration across agencies. So please be sure to visit our DC Post website for a full list of all the educational and social events throughout the year. Be sure to connect with us on LinkedIn. We share industry news, event photos, and all while building a strong network across the AEC industry. And you can also watch our First Friday sessions on our YouTube channel. So if you'd like to reach a global community of over 7,000 architecture, engineering, construction, and tech leaders with an annual Post sponsorship, you have the opportunity to leverage our networks and showcase your firm with visibility and international recognition you won't find anywhere else. Support this annual program sponsorship, just like this First Friday series and individual events throughout the year, just like our upcoming awards banquet and symposium at the National Press Club. Check out all the benefits and sponsorship and support the mission of DC Post and your community today. So again, thank you for attending this First Friday webinar, and thank you Doug, Keeley, and Dana at Fox Rothschild for providing the educational content for this session. If you haven't, you can download the documents of today's documents before you leave the webinar. Just look at the big red arrow. Also look for the document delivery in the subject line with your slide, PDH certificate, and opt-in list of registered participants today. And we'll post the recording on the DC Post website later on. And you might get an email from Doug and team for more information, what was presented, how you can sign up for the newsletter on upcoming events as well. So again, thank you to the DC Post First Friday sponsors, Fox Rothschild, KCT, Parsons Corporation, and Stantec. So on behalf of myself, Bree Beal, and Samantha Long, have a great weekend. And we look forward to seeing you at the awards banquet at the end of the month.
Thanks, everybody, for joining. Have a good weekend.
Yep.